What is going on, everyone? Welcome to another edition of Touchline Talk. So excited to get started today. We've got a wide variety of topics to cover and the debut of a new segment. You're not going to want to miss that. Unfortunately, we had some technical difficulties, which is why we weren't able to be live today. We're working on figuring that out, but nevertheless, we persist. So this first segment, I wanted to sort of go through some news and notes, things that have been happening in the soccer world these last couple days. There have just been a lot of sort of small topics here or there that are worth touching on, but none of them are a big enough deal to make into a full segment by themselves. So that's what we're going to do. We're just going to go through some things that you need to know about that have happened since we last talked on Tuesday. Number one, we got more VAR problems. I'm not going to go over this time and time again, but this was a perfect opportunity to illustrate my views on VAR, which is something I haven't really done on the show before. We've talked about it, but I want to just sort of lay it all out there one time. And what happened both in Leicester City Everton and then West Ham Chelsea is exactly what the problem with this technology is. The technology is not inherently bad in itself. It's not something that even necessarily I think should go away. However, if we are going to use the phrase clear and obvious, then we need to actually mean it and create some sort of standard. The easiest way to do this is to say, if it's whether it's 30 seconds or a minute, pick some sort of time frame and say, if you can't overturn the call in that period, that means it's not clear and obvious and we're not going to touch it. If our threshold is the clear and obvious error, that means that if it takes 3 minutes for you to figure out whether it was a handball on Wilfred Ndidi or not, it is not a clear and obvious error. And the same thing goes with Souček's goal for West Ham that got overturned. And the other interesting thing about both of these, they both got overturned too. It's not even like there was a long delay and then they decided to stay with the call on the field. They both decided that it was overturned without the ref who made the call looking at the monitor, which is another issue I have. But this has got to stop. The only way we're going to make progress and implement this technology in a productive way that everybody can at least understand what's going on is if we stop trying to re-referee and make this a technology the referees can use to make up for the mistakes that they've made, because they're trying their best, but they're human. They want to have that protection to go back and say, you know what, I missed that one. That was a really bad on me, but let's get it right. You know, you go look at, for example, the Armando Galarraga perfect game for the Tigers when Jim Joyce just blew the call at first base. How much would Jim Joyce give to be able to have that kind of replay to look back and say, you know, I missed it, but we can get it right? It's the same idea here. We don't need this to go back and try and find every microscopic error that referees make. We need it so that when the ball clearly goes in the goal, like it did for Sheffield United, it's there when the referee somehow misses it and the goal line technology misses it to say that was a goal. That's what it's supposed to be there for, but we're not using it correctly. Everybody has different ideas of what it's supposed to be. The only way, I'm not going to go on and on about this, I'm not going to bring it up every time, but I just sat there watching those games thinking this is exactly what I'm talking about. It is not here to be referee, it's here to help refs, and all it's doing is making their job more difficult right now. Lionel Messi scored his 700th career goal on a penalty kick in a draw against Atletico Madrid, which just gave Real Madrid even more of an advantage in La Liga. We'll get to that a little bit later. But Messi's 700th goal came in his 862nd career game. That is 111 fewer games than it took Ronaldo to reach the 700 goal mark. Messi is the 7th player to reach 700 in his career. And sort of projecting forward on this, there's a very good chance that Messi continues to climb this list and could even end up second. He just turned 23. You're talking about another 150 goals, which he's getting 30 to 40 a year, assuming he stays healthy. And then there's Pele, who, depending on who you believe, either scored somewhere in the 700s or over 1100. So, you know, that's there is some ambiguity and some confusion about what these totals, some of these guys who are actually at the top of this list, where they actually ended up. Regardless, this is about Messi. He's got the 700th. It's one of those milestones that you look at as, you know, the truly great goal scorers. Again, only 7th player to ever do this. He did it at a ridiculously fast pace. He's got every opportunity to end up as obviously he's already one of the greatest goal scorers of all time, but to actually statistically end up in there and make a run at ending top 3, top 2, and really put himself even further into that discussion of really being the greatest of all time. Willian of Chelsea not only scored twice in Chelsea's loss to West Ham, but he made a piece of history that could very well never be replicated. He is the first Premier League player ever to score in all 12 calendar months. This obviously only happened because of the COVID break and Project Restart, because Premier League doesn't play games in July. Nevertheless, Willian, who's been a great player in the Premier League for years now, has now scored in every calendar month, which is you look at it and it's sort of not all that much of an impressive accomplishment. But then you think about the fact that July just doesn't exist, and June for that matter as well. This could never happen again. And I also wanted to use this as an opportunity to talk about how good Willian is. I feel like he's one of those unheralded guys at Chelsea who just kind of shows up and scores goals. You saw the free kick. I mean, his technical ability is incredible. And so he puts away the penalty that Christian Pulisic draws, and then he gets Chelsea back in the game with this wonderful free kick. It was very fitting that in the game where he set this record, if you want to call it that, it was also a testament to how good of a player he is, and he's going to move on at the end of the season. It's not clear where he's going to go. There's obviously interest across Europe, and yes, he's on the older side. He's near the end of his career, but it's not like he's 35. He's got multiple impactful years left, and if I'm a team in the contending for a Champions League spot, or who knows that they're going to be in the Champions League next year, could use an extra depth piece to sort of balance that domestic competition with playing in Europe, and have the resources to go get somebody like him, I am going to seriously consider signing this man. I don't think he gets enough credit for how good he has been, how consistent he's been. Of course, he's not a game changer like a Messi, a Ronaldo, an Eden Hazard, a Kevin De Bruyne. You go down the list. He's not that level player. But he has these moments of brilliance that is just something that is very rare, and there are only a handful of players that produce those moments at the level he does. And so, congratulations to Willian on this sort of strange but very impressive at the same time accomplishment. And keep your eye on where he goes once this season is over, because he's going to have a chance to make an impact somewhere and make a team very happy. Leroy Sané is officially / unofficially on his way to Bayern Munich. Pep Guardiola all but confirmed the transfer is going to happen. He may or may not be actually at Bayern right now, depending on... There's this video that was released that he might have been there going to sign his contract. It's not exactly clear where in the process this transfer is, but it's going to happen for somewhere around $60 million, which is an absolute steal for Bayern. You get a world-class 24-year-old for $60 million, who was just playing at Manchester City and was starting for the better part of his career there until he got hurt and Pep sort of changed his preferred 11, and Sané's had a hard time getting back into that and sort of getting himself healthy again. He's not eligible to play next season, so he's not going to come in and help them in the Champions League. But this is, again, you throw him in with what Hansi Flick has done, sort of revitalizing and changing the way that Bayern play, getting more aggressive, higher pressing. The midfield of Thiago and Joshua Kimmich. Lewandowski is Lewandowski. All the weapons they have in attack, you just throw Sané into that mix, and he's even a step above at least most of them, I would argue. He provides you with that second primary goal-scoring threat, and then you've got your Serge Gnabry's, and you can go down the list. Alphonso Davies is very quickly solidifying himself as a world-class left-back who fits perfectly into what Bayern's trying to do. This has very quickly gone from this team is not good enough and not living up to expectations to this team is all of a sudden right back in the conversation for being the best team in the world. They have every opportunity to win this year's Champions League. Then you throw a 24-year-old Sané who now has something to prove for a relatively cheap price. I mean, there was a time where he's probably worth double what they're going to pay for him. Bayern is absolutely rolling. It's going to be more Bundesliga titles, but the more interesting and where Sané is going to make that difference is when it comes to Europe, because they're going to be right there among the best teams in the world next season and are already playing like it since Hansi Flick took over, and they've sort of revitalized themselves, and especially since the Bundesliga restarted and then finished. They've been sensational and only expect that to continue, and Sané is just going to make them that much better. On a more somber note, Wigan, playing in the Championship, second division of England soccer, has gone into administration, which means they're facing a 12-point penalty for basically not being able to be financially solvent and take care of themselves from a financial perspective. And so to de-incentivize this, what the English Football Association does is that they impose a points penalty. So Wigan is currently 14th. They're 8 points clear of the relegation zone. If they are able to stay up based on their own results, that 12-point penalty will be applied this season. So if they ended exactly where they are now, those 12 points would be applied, they would end up last, and they would get relegated. If they manage to overcome that theoretical 12-point gap that has now been imposed on them, so they finish at least 13 points clear of the first team to get relegated, if they aren't able to do that, so they're within that 12-point margin of it, they get relegated by themselves without needing this penalty to be imposed. Then, not only do they get relegated, but that penalty then gets imposed when they go down to League One. It's an absolute mess, and you have to feel awful for this team. They haven't lost since February 8th. They've outscored opponents 7-0 since the championship is restarted. And the bigger point I want to make here is that they are not going to be the only ones this is going to happen to. COVID has decimated the lower leagues across the world, and specifically in England, when they are so reliant on bringing people into the stands as a form of revenue, because the TV money is obviously not anywhere near what it is in the Premier League. And these teams are always financially motivated to overinvest in the hopes of getting to the Premier League and getting that TV money that changes your club for multiple years, if not permanently. So this is just the tip of the iceberg, but Wigan is the first team to enter administration. It all but assures, I don't even want to say it all but assures, this team is playing really well right now. There is a chance that they continue this, and so if they finish 13 points clear of the relegation zone, then the penalty is imposed and they're fine. So there's an opportunity, and I wouldn't rule it out just because of how frustrated they are that this is the way this whole thing is developed. I wouldn't rule it out, but obviously it's just a huge ask to put yourself in a 12-point hole, and then know that even if you don't stay up on your own merits, those 12 points then come when you go drop the league, to add insult to injury. It's just a really tough situation, but don't be surprised if this is going to happen to other teams as well. And then you've got a whole mess on your hand, because you're going to have, half a league, a quarter of a league, who are all facing these penalties because they went into administration. There's a chance that we get to a point where there's just some sort of grace shown, and whether it's through an appeals process or just an understanding that this is the reality of the world we're living in because of the pandemic. But regardless of what happens in the future, keep your eye on this. Wigan is the first team to go to administration, and it could very well derail what has been a very promising second half of the season for them. So you got to feel for this club. Last thing I want to touch on before we head to break. Yesterday was the 6-year anniversary, it feels weird to say, of USA-Belgium, which was also the last World Cup match played by the U.S. men. Lost in extra time to an absolutely loaded Belgium team. This is the game where Tim Howard set the World Cup record for saves. And I just wanted to touch on this game in a couple different aspects. First, This is always sort of remembered as the game where Tim Howard stood on his head. But I would like to submit that, yes, Howard played well. But a lot of the story of those saves had to do with the defense in front of him. If you go back and go watch the highlights, so many of those shots were not great chances. They were routine saves because the defense had done enough, whether it was cutting off an angle and setting up a very capable and excellent goalkeeper like Howard to do his job, or by just preventing Belgium from being able to get inside the penalty box and forcing those shots from distance. You saw a lot of shots from distance, especially early first half, first 60 minutes. And so that makes Tim Howard's job that much easier. I'm not trying to necessarily take away from what he did, but at the same time, this is sort of his crowning moment, but we forget about the defense in front of him. There's also the fact that this U.S. team had multiple chances to equalize after Julian Green scored. This was a highly competitive match. Yes, Belgium were the better team. That's no surprise. But this was not as much of a story as the underdog Americans somehow found a way to hang in there, I think, as we sort of frame it to be. This is very much they performed well and were good enough to win. It just didn't go their way. They're not anywhere near Belgium's talent level, obviously, but this was a very, very good performance by the U.S. On the topic of Julian Green, he's gone from the future of U.S. soccer. He's playing for Grutherfurt in Bundesliga 2. His career's just never taken off. It's sort of just interesting to look back on that now 6 years later. And, of course, this is also the game that defined Chris Wondolowski's career. And if there's one moment, one situation that supports and justifies Jurgen Klinsmann's insistence that his players go play and challenge themselves in Europe, to me, it's that Wondolowski miss. Right? This is your prototypical MLS veteran. He's one of the best goal scorers in league history. He's been sensational for the Earthquakes. But when you get to that World Cup, when you get to the international level, that competition is just that much better. There is a value to having guys used to playing against a Kevin De Bruyne, a Romelu Lukaku, a Vincent Kompany. The kind of players that Christian Pulisic is facing and just scored against in that Manchester City game. And the kind of guys he played against at Dortmund, and that Weston McKennie is seeing at Schalke, and you go down the list. There is an immense value to that, and so as we're looking back 6 years later, the U.S. has not made a World Cup since. Obviously, they've only had one chance in that horrid night in Trinidad, but I did want to mention that, and just Jurgen Klinsmann's got a lot of criticism, and rightfully so. I'm not saying he should have kept his job. I think he was fired when he needed to be. But it's not like everything he said was completely off the walls. There is some validity, some things, and Chris Wondolowski, it's unfair to just define him by that one miss because of the career he's had. But it's also hard to look back and say, and the other part of this too, right? That's probably Landon Donovan if Landon Donovan doesn't take his sabbatical. There's just a lot of what ifs. This is a very fascinating game that's going to go down in the annals of U.S. soccer. Just want to touch on that quickly since we're on the 6-year anniversary, which seems kind of crazy because it feels like just yesterday, but obviously it was not. Okay, that's our look at news and notes, kind of things happening around the soccer world. When we come back, we're going to debut our new segment called The Supporters Corner, where we're going to just sort of talk to soccer fans of different clubs and get their perspective on things that are happening, how they became fans, just sort of a different take on the soccer experience, and hopefully you're going to enjoy it. I'm really looking forward to our first guest. It's very fitting. There's a reason I wanted him this week, so stay tuned for that. You're watching Touchline Talk on 110 Sports. Welcome back to Touchline Talk, and as I said before the break, it's time for our first ever edition of Supporters Corner. Joining me in the Supporters Corner this week is Sid Varanasi. I've known Sid for 7-8 years now, which also seems crazy. He's a Liverpool fan, not only a Liverpool fan, but one of the more intelligent soccer minds that I know. So I wanted to have him on this week to get his thoughts on obviously what this Premier League title means for Liverpool, what it means for him as a Liverpool fan who has seen, everything that this club has gone through since he started supporting them, and just sort of his own Liverpool story and how he became to support this club, how he is incorporated into the club's culture and this idea of you'll never walk alone, even though he lives here in the U.S. and not in Liverpool or in England. So without further ado, here is our first ever edition of the Supporters Corner with Sid Varanasi. Welcome, Sid. Thanks so much for coming on to the show. We really appreciate you being here. How you doing?
Not too bad. How are you?
I'm doing fine. It's definitely an interesting world we're living in, but we have soccer, so that makes it a little bit better.
Yep, even if there are no fans.
That's right. All right, so one of the things I wanted to start with, just because I'm so fascinated by how people, specifically in the U.S., pick teams. So how did you become a Liverpool fan? Where did that start for you, and when did that start?
Sure. So I actually became a Liverpool fan after learning more about my dad. So my dad grew up a Liverpool fan. I'd hear him talking about how Ian Rush just was one of the better strikers that he's watched in his day. And since then, I've kind of been really taken away by both Liverpool and the community that Liverpool is. So to me, it's more than just a club. It's a community, right? You hear "You'll never walk alone," and you know that you have supporters that are with you. So it's almost like a family. And I believe that for me, that started around really elementary school, so third or fourth grade for me.
Okay, so do you remember the 2005 Champions League final? Is that something that is part of your fandom, or was that sort of as you were still developing this?
That was as I was still kind of developing. I think I first started watching soccer, international soccer, so that would have been the 2006 World Cup. But I remember
Okay.
I bought like a small Liverpool jersey, like a small kit, not really understanding that there's the Premier League. But as I was growing up, you start to follow more sports and you realize, there's more than just countries that play soccer. There's leagues all over the world.
Okay, so and that's one of the other things I wanted to touch on. You talked about the community aspect, and that's obviously such a big part of what Liverpool is. One of the
Right.
things that I think separates Liverpool from some of the other big clubs, the ability to stay true and authentic to that as you get into this, globalization and Manchester City with all this money and things like that. What has that been like for you as somebody who obviously isn't in Liverpool every day,
Sure.
not going to Anfield on a regular basis? And what does that sort of community mean to you as somebody who is obviously part of it, and it's a global thing without a doubt, but it's also sort of different than just somebody who's there every day, sort of ingrained at
Right.
Anfield and in Liverpool.
Yeah, so that's one main difference, but as you mentioned, like globalization, you can connect with anyone that's a Liverpool fan, right? You have online communities where you can just talk about your fandom. And last year, actually, I was able to visit Anfield, and let me tell you, like that in itself was an entire experience. Just visiting the city of Liverpool, you could see just how friendly the people were. The whole community aspect really takes off from there as well, especially when you told them that you were there just to see the stadium. Because a lot of people go to Liverpool for the Beatles, but I went just to see a tour of Anfield, and that really put it all into perspective. But in terms of being like an active member of the community here, um, there are like there's a Liverpool support group, I think, in Columbus that I went to. Uh, I believe the game against City. I went to the bar there, and that was fantastic to see Fabinho's goal there. But it really is a different feeling compared to just growing up in Liverpool and having that completely ingrained. So it's just trying to make the most of being a fan as you can.
And is there one thing that stood out to you, or sort of one memory that sticks out above the rest about getting to go to Liverpool, getting to tour Anfield? Is there one thing, obviously I'm sure it is, memorable for many different reasons, but is there one thing that sort of stuck with you or surprised you about that experience?
Just the history. Part of the tour, they showed a video, right, just taking you back from all the days. And yeah, we can talk about how Liverpool hadn't won the Premier League at that time. So a lot of the clips of the video were from, the 70s and 80s. And you were like, a club was at its peak then, and how can it get back to that former glory? But hearing people, hearing the ushers talk about growing up watching Liverpool, hearing my taxi driver talking about, um, how he's had season tickets for 20 plus years. So that would probably be the aspect that really stood out to me the most in terms of going to Liverpool, is just the history of it all.
And now, right, there is a new chapter to this club's history.
Right.
For finally get that Premier League championship. What was the Chelsea City game, and just this idea that it was clinched way beforehand, it wasn't actually in doubt. You had a pandemic in the middle right before it actually was
Right.
clinched, and it's clinched in a game that Liverpool didn't actually play in. What was all of that like, and just sort of what is this last week been like for you?
So I would say bittersweet, but I don't want to get carried away and like take away from the accomplishment, because as you mentioned, we were far ahead of everyone else. But I know secretly I was talking to one of my friends, and I was saying I hope that City actually pulls it off, because what better way to win it than against City? So that's how I was feeling about it. But the whole pandemic thing really changes it, because we had to wait so much longer. But I know the celebrations, they really made up for for not having soccer all that time.
And how
But
does oh, sorry, go ahead.
no, but it certainly was a wait, and I'm just happy that the season wasn't canceled, that they found a way to finish it off.
Yeah, it would have been just a travesty if it couldn't have been proven officially, because they were just so much better than everybody else and absolutely
Right.
deserved it. I'm right there with you. Okay, so for you, as somebody who, right, wasn't there for this entire 30-year stretch, obviously, and because one of the things with this club is it's always about the league first. That's sort of been the mentality.
Mhm.
How does this compare to last season's Champions League for you specifically, with sort of your history and the way that your fandom developed and the time frame that you've sort of had experience being a Liverpool fan?
Sure. Both are special in its own right, right? I mean, last year's Champions League felt like a dream, um, especially after beating Barcelona. So that in itself was also special, because you were, you know, you weren't expected to compete when you're down 3-0, right? And you go back and you score four on one of the best players of all time. So that was a special memory in itself. But again, the Premier League, um, it's the Premier League. It's been 30 years. So to me, I almost felt like the Champions League was more special. Uh, But that's only because this pandemic kind of took away from it all. And the season started off phenomenal, right? We were in Champions League, we were in the FA Cup, and then we were undefeated in the Premier League. And then all of a sudden, within a matter of like weeks, right, you lose, you lose to Atletico in a game that I think shouldn't have happened, and then the FA Cup. So probably because I haven't been there for all 30 years, I prefer the Champions League victory. But that's not to say that the Premier League isn't special, because you finally got that one trophy, and all those jokes about Liverpool not winning the Premier League stop now.
Yeah, for sure. And okay, so I'm curious for your thoughts on this too, because I was talking on the show Tuesday about this idea that I think it's, in terms of a legacy perspective, I think it's incredibly important for this team to do everything in their power, and it sounds like this is where Klopp's head is at as well, to break the points record for the specific reason you just mentioned, that November, December, it's a conversation about, okay, you win the Club World Cup, you give away the Carabao Cup, which doesn't even count because it wasn't even the first team players.
Right.
Right. You've still got an FA Cup that obviously they have a great chance to win. Champions League is obviously also still a possibility, and you're undefeated in the league. And then all of a sudden it went from, could they win a Champions League and match the Invincibles? Or can they
Could
win
they
a
win a treble,
treble?
right? Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Or can you win a treble and also break the points record? Or, there's these combinations that make them almost indisputably the best single season in history. And some of that came away. So for you,
Hmm.
what do you think it's important that, just from a sort of a legacy perspective, and even outside, just obviously this team's going to be memorable because they're the ones that won the Premier League.
Right.
But from a larger perspective, I'm curious of your thoughts on where you see the end of this season going and how important you think it is to try and do everything to set as many records as possible and try and, specifically that single season points record.
Yeah, I for sure think that. Uh, Obviously, I wouldn't want my team to put my foot off the gas, because yeah, as you were mentioning, from the legacy perspective, you want this team to be remembered, and they will. But again, the scope of how they were remembered changes from the past few months. So with that being said, I know the new Premier League rules give more flexibility in terms of substitutions and all that. So, long-term health for the players is important. So do everything in your power to set the points record, but at the same time, I'd like to see some of the youth play, whether that's Harvey Elliott, Nico Williams, and so on and so forth. So it's always important for them to get that experience if Liverpool is to dominate in the future, right? Rather than just this being a one-off.
Mm-hmm. And I also want to talk about Klopp for a second. So when Klopp gets hired,
Hmm.
obviously there's a pedigree there. He's dethroning Bayern Munich in the Bundesliga. you
Right.
you sort of look at Dortmund and say, well, maybe they weren't quite good enough to reach that level, but they still get to a Champions League final. His track record is very much proven by the time he gets to Liverpool. But what were your thoughts on that hiring when it happened, and sort of how has it evolved as you've seen him take this team from where it was to just this, unstoppable force of optimism and relentlessness?
I remember, like, I think we had a conversation as soon as Klopp was hired, and I think we were just talking about how good of a hire it was. It's the perfect kind of it was the perfect hire, like coming from Dortmund, where their fan base is equally as passionate, coming to um, a community like Liverpool that fully accepted him, was ready to give him that opportunity to end our curse, right? And he showed that he could compete. He took us to the Europa League final. He took us to I believe he took us to the EFL Cup final as well. His first season, lost to City on penalties, but he showed that he could compete, and we just needed that missing link to really take us over the edge. And Virgil van Dijk and Allison was those missing links, right? Compared to the teams of the past,
Mm-hmm.
where Mignolet or Karius was the ones that were not letting us be competent. So that hire in itself, I think I knew that it was a perfect match, but I was a little skeptical if the results would be delivered, just because did not have the financial power of City and other clubs. So with that being said, the transfers over the past few years have been spot on, and I guess that's the reason why Liverpool is going to compete going forward, is just how well they are doing financially.
Yeah, and you look at, some of these guys, I also mentioned this on the show on Tuesday, right? You get Gini Wijnaldum from a relegated Newcastle. Mo Salah isn't exactly heralded after his struggles at Chelsea. You still got your James Milners and Jordan Hendersons who, especially that first Champions League, I sort of looked at that midfield and went, I mean,
Yeah.
okay. But all of a sudden, James Milner is leading the Champions League in assists, and Jordan Henderson's finding this new position and thriving. And it's
Right.
been quite impressive to just sort of see the evolution from a transfer perspective. And part of that to me goes back to Philippe Coutinho and the way
Yep.
that money was spent. So what was going through your head when he decided he wanted to leave? Because I feel like that's one of these turning points where you look at it and you go, he was so important to what was going on at that moment in time. But now you look at it in hindsight's 2020, where you go, they spent, that's why they were able to spend this money, identify those flaws, and go get the best of the best that were available in Allison and Van Dijk. So what do you remember about sort of your thoughts at that tipping point with Coutinho?
I think I was upset, obviously, but at the same time, I think the fee was just so huge that I figured um, there are a lot of ways to invest it. And when we spent all that money on Van Dijk, I think I was skeptical like a lot of people, right? You know, that's a lot of money you're paying for a center back, but it's obviously proven to be worth it. Same with Allison, you're paying a lot of money for a goalkeeper, and yeah, Karius had some blunders, but you know, he's made some good saves, and that's the kind of mindset I had at the beginning. And then Allison comes and just shows just how world class he is, and even in the Champions League final against Tottenham, he did fantastic, right? Kept us in the game for so long. So, yeah, I mean, no complaints about that. But I know I was initially upset that we were losing a creative spark in Coutinho, and I know still to this day people are commenting about, oh, Liverpool needs one more creative threat in that midfield to
Hmm.
really get the best out of the front three. But watching that team play, it's evolved, right? We don't need that threat from the midfield. It's coming more from Robbo and Alexander Arnold, right? So that's also a flaw in its sense. In if a team is as defensively strong as Atletico, they just, Robertson and Alexander Arnold were not really able to create too many opportunities. But I mean, it's worked out for the most part, right? You have a Champions League and Premier League, so you can't complain.
Yeah, and one of the other things that's so interesting to me about this team, sort of to that point, is right. You basically replace the creative midfielder with just pressing and turning defense into offense, and essentially using your fullbacks to press in the opponent's third in that middle half, that middle third, as opposed to putting them in the natural positions. But it's perfectly built for this team, and Klopp's been doing it since he was at Dortmund at Mainz. It's just part of his philosophy.
Right.
Okay, yeah. So a couple more questions. One of them I just simply want to ask: what did you think? What were your expectations for this season? Did you think this? Obviously, maybe not this was possible, but were you of the mindset of this is a legitimate race with City, or was it more of a cautious optimism?
I'd say cautious optimism when you get so close. You're 1 point away last year in a season that I thought could not have gone any better, right? And then they come out and do this, but I would say definitely cautiously optimistic. I guess it did help that City did have some injury woes at the beginning of the season, so that helped Liverpool get off to a strong start, and just throughout the season build that point total that couldn't be caught up with. But yeah, definitely off tail too many times where you get so close.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm waiting this long and just what this means to this club. I'm sure nobody has wanted to get too excited.
Right.
And then, okay, so I'm stealing this question from Andrew Gunling of the Caught Offside podcast, but I thought it was a good one. So a team like this, right, one of the things you start thinking about is statues and who gets the statue outside of Anfield. And obviously probably the easy answer is Klopp.
Right.
And I would argue the correct answer is some sort of sculpture with a bunch of different people in it. But if you could just pick one player, so leave Klopp out of it, and give a
Okay.
statue to one individual player, who would it be?
Say Mane.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. I would have gone with Salah, but I feel like Mane arguably this season was more instrumental,
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Reliable. And I think since we got him from Southampton, he's been. I mean, he did have that like he let Salah take the spotlight a year or two, but he's still been in the shadows and always there to deliver when you need him to.
Interesting. Okay.
But
That
I
might
mean,
not have been the one I thought, but I kind of like it.
I think Hendo would have been nice too, just because he's the skipper. But
Right.
I
Right.
think
It's
Hendo and Klopp are the two easiest answers. I wanted something a little different.
yeah. Yeah. It's very easy, right, to point to the guy wearing the armband who's just racking up these trophies and go, yeah, he's the guy. Okay. So then finally, where do you see this going moving forward? Where is your head at right now? Obviously, you're, very much set up to compete in the Champions League and compete for another league title next year. City is going to regroup, theoretically, get healthier. It sounds like they might not be getting as much money as they might have thought for Leroy Sané, but there's going to be some sort of cash coming in that they can use to go reinforce that team. I'm very high on what Chelsea's doing. What are your thoughts sort of in these next couple of years? What do you expect? What do you hope? What do you think is realistic?
Well, first off, I would have loved Timo Werner to join Liverpool, but that didn't happen. So, I mean, if we get Mbappe, yeah, that's fine. No, no real complaints from me. But realistically, I think we're going to be smart with our spending, and I guess we've shown that you don't need the money. Like, I know that Liverpool isn't exactly Leicester in terms of the budget that they used, but you don't need the kind of financial the finances that have to win a Premier League title, especially if this team gels as well as they do, the chemistry they have. But I'd love to see another run into the Champions League. I'd love to see an FA Cup too. I've seen Premier League and I've seen Champions League, but can't take away from the FA Cup. And more than spending on like Havertz or Sancho, I'd love to see like more development of the youth. Try to get them to break into that starting 11 eventually.
Find another Alexander-Arnold.
Yeah, not exactly easy to do, but hopefully that happens.
All right, awesome. Well, really appreciate you taking the time. Thanks so much, Sid.
No problem.
Thanks so much to Sid for taking the time to join us. That was awesome. Just sort of hear about his journey to becoming a Liverpool fan. I'm really looking forward to doing these every week. Just learn more about soccer supporter culture in this country and just get some different perspective on things in addition to my own. Add another voice to the show. So be on the lookout for more editions of the Supporters Corner coming every Thursday in the future. All right, so we're going to take one more final break. When we come back, the way we end every show, we're going to look at what's next coming up across the world of soccer. Welcome back to Touchline Talk. We're going to wrap up the show the same way we always do. Segment we call What's Next, sort of looking ahead at things that are going to happen before we talk again on Tuesday. And that starts this very afternoon, Thursday, July 2nd. Manchester City, Liverpool. There is very little to actually play for in this game, obviously, as we've talked about at length on this show this week. Liverpool has already clinched the league. Manchester City, with the recent dips in form of Chelsea and Leicester, are going to finish second. Question is whether it really matters because of their Champions League ban. Regardless, there's one thing, this is about one thing and one thing only. That is about Liverpool asserting their dominance by winning this game as well, beating their closest, most serious rival this season, and more importantly, continuing to build points to try and break that points record that, ironically, this City team is the one that holds, which also makes this interesting because Manchester City and Pep Guardiola, from a cultural standpoint and just his philosophy, is very much of the... I feel like they're going to be very motivated to do what they can to try and keep that record for themselves. Obviously, they can't control whether Liverpool breaks it or not. But if you take 3 points from them here, then all of a sudden it gets a little bit more interesting. So it's noteworthy. This is about Liverpool trying to continue to build the legacy of this team, as Sid and I just talked about in our interview for the Supporters Corner. And Manchester City obviously has the ability to play with and beat Liverpool to try and stop that from happening. So it's noteworthy. It's not quite the hyped matchup that we thought it would be earlier in the season or even maybe a couple weeks ago when it looked like this might be the game where Liverpool could clinch. But nevertheless, it's Pep Guardiola, Jurgen Klopp, the newly crowned champions, the former champions. Can't get much better than that. And then Real Madrid's going to play Getafe. Real Madrid, because of Barcelona's draw with Atleti, is now 1 point up and has a game in hand. This is their extra game, so if they win this one, they go 4 up and hold the tiebreaker. It's getting to the point where we're not going to cover this race as closely just because it's not as much of a race anymore. But if Madrid slip up here, then Barcelona can put pressure on them again if they run the table the rest of the way. I don't see that happening. Real Madrid are flying at the moment. But nevertheless, it's noteworthy. Wanted to touch on it quickly. Perhaps the most interesting game of the day is the Bundesliga relegation playoff between Heidenheim and Werder Bremen. So we talked about on Tuesday, Werder Bremen put together a very comprehensive victory and got some help from Fortuna Dusseldorf to actually get into this spot as opposed to being automatically relegated. Heidenheim slipped in after Hamburg controlled their own destiny and collapsed in the last game of the Bundesliga 2 season. So you have Heidenheim and Werder Bremen. Florian Kohfeldt has done a really nice job of just not losing this team being Bremen. It'd be really easy with the amount of frustrating performances they've had, their inability to score goals, the way they've leaked at the back, to lose faith. But he's at least done enough to keep this team believing that they had a chance when everybody pretty much wrote them off. And so this is their reward for that, is you take care over 2 legs and you stay up in the Bundesliga, get to regroup with a fresh slate next season. So the first leg is today, July 2nd, and then the next leg is next week, but I'm very curious to see how this goes. It's one of the more interesting just games of the soccer calendar. It's a little bit different from the playoff system in England just because you've got 4 teams involved in all of these different legs and then a 1-leg playoff for the final. This is just 2 legs, 2 teams, one stays up or gets to come up, the other is then in Bundesliga 2. Saturday, July 4th, incredibly busy day across the soccer landscape. Playing Premier League action, Manchester United, Bournemouth, Wolves, Arsenal are the 2 perhaps most noteworthy games. Another loss by Leicester, the surprising loss by Chelsea to West Ham, and all of a sudden, United and Wolves are 3 points out of 3rd, 2 points out of 4th. This is absolutely, there are 3 spots, assuming City is ineligible. 5th, 4th, and 3rd are all for the taking. Chelsea wasn't a good stretch of form, but you don't know what's going to happen after a devastating loss like that West Ham game. That can change things for both teams. We're going to touch on that in a little bit. But it's a real question of how Chelsea responds to that. And United and Wolves are just absolutely in tip-top form right now. They are rolling. I really like at least one of their chances to finish top 4. I've said I'm going with Wolves. I'm sticking with that. But unless something changes very quickly, and specifically unless if Leicester beats Crystal Palace this weekend, then maybe it's a little bit discussion. But at this point, there's every chance that your top 4 are Liverpool, Manchester City, Manchester United, and Wolves. Whether it's 3-4, whether Wolves is ahead or Manchester United's ahead, those are they have closed this gap with enough time remaining to really put themselves in position to do that, which even a couple of days ago, a week ago, I didn't think was a real possibility at all. DFB-Pokal Final. Bayer Leverkusen, Bayern Munich. This is the final, with the exception of the second leg of the relegation playoff, this is the final game of the German schedule. Obviously, Bayern is just continuing to give themselves chances to pick up trophies. Leverkusen has had a really good season. Could be Kai Havertz's last game at the club, who knows. If Leverkusen were to pull this off, they would be the 4th winner in 4 years and the 5th in 6 years. So this is Bayern are the defending champions. They consistently get to the final, but this is not something where they have been dominant to the same degree they have been in the league. They have been suspect to an upset. You've seen some strange things happen. Some different teams win this. So Bayern is very much the team to beat and in excellent form. But it's, one game. It's the beauty of the cup. Who knows what happens? And it's Leverkusen is a team that is absolutely capable from a quality standpoint of beating Bayern. So definitely worth tuning in, seeing what happens. And when you are a German club not named Bayern and you have an opportunity to get a trophy, that's always a big deal. So Leverkusen's going to be ready to go. It should be a very interesting game to see if Bayern can just sort of assert their dominance again, or if Leverkusen can steal this one. NWSL, Utah Royal, Sky Blue FC, Houston Dash, OL Reign. This is the second group of four we haven't talked as much about. Both of these, when they played their first games, these were all draws, so all four of these teams are sitting on 1 point. There isn't too much that I want to say here other than to just sort of highlight that these are the other four teams. This is a lot of rebuilding, retooling. You've got some young players. No Megan Rapinoe for the Reign, as we talked about in our preview. But whoever, if you get another draw in one of these games, somebody gets a win, all of a sudden that team is in a really good position, especially with North Carolina winning again yesterday. Second place is very much up for grabs. And so there's somebody from this group is going to have a good chance that they can get some momentum going and pick up 3 points in this game right here. Finally, Sunday, July 5th, Liverpool, Aston Villa. Again, Liverpool just trying to accumulate those points. Aston Villa trying to stay up. And their promotion hopes took a massive hit when West Ham was able to have a goal disallowed, give up a penalty right after, then equalize. Then they got a second. Then Williams scored a free kick to equalize again. And then they got the late goal from Yarmolenko to take all 3 points from Chelsea, which was absolutely massive. First, because as I've been talking about and harping on, nobody is getting points at the bottom of this table. Bournemouth lost again. It is rough down there. And so those 3 points put West Ham 3 points clear. And they were right there on points in the relegation zone, tied with relegation zone on points, only ahead because of goal differential going into this. And then you saw what happened with Brighton, that momentum of getting that massive win against that big club. This changes everything for West Ham. It changes how I view the relegation race. I think that Aston Villa is the big loser here. Before this, I liked what I had seen enough to say that I thought they might be the team able to stay up. And now I'm going with West Ham. I think the three in there right now, Bournemouth, Villa, and Norwich, are going to be the three that go down. But again, that can change if Aston Villa is able to win this game. And West Ham has a winnable game against Newcastle, but Newcastle's been playing well recently. So can West Ham get even another point on the board? Could be enough to at least give you some cushion, if not actually get you safe. Can they build on this momentum, get another 3 points, and really make themselves feel like they're in a good position? Or was it a one-off against Chelsea? They lose this game, some other things happen, and they're right back into the thick of that relegation race. And then you've got the other four teams that we've been talking about more in the NWSL: North Carolina Courage, Chicago Red Stars, Portland Thorns, Washington Spirit. North Carolina rested some of their key players for 45 minutes. They came on the field, and then all of a sudden, Washington was fairly hopeless last night. It was just a very good performance. Lynn Williams scoring both goals for the Courage, who still don't have Jessica McDonald, and it still doesn't matter. They're that deep. Dabinia is still playing out of her mind. Rose Lavelle was not as impressive this game as she was the first one. Lindsey Horan is doing some incredible work for Portland. They just sort of haven't been able to really get things going. This is the powerhouse group of four. Chicago gets their shot at the Courage to see if anybody can knock this team off. And the Thorns could really use this opportunity to move themselves in the standings with the Washington team that already has 3 points. This has just been a very fascinating tournament, and we're getting into the thick of things now, where this is their final games of the group stage, and then you're getting into the knockouts and the really fun stuff. So stay tuned for all of that. And that is our show for today. Thank you so much for listening to Touchline Talk, and we'll see you on Tuesday.